Well, that was an interesting start of chapter 13, where they were in Mr. Burton's class and he had them writing notes. They had to keep writing to each other, and yeah, they just kept writing notes. So Dave and Lindsay were in the middle of it, and Dave had an idea pop into his head. We're going to find out what that idea is. Pressing down hard with his pencil, Dave wrote, "How about you and me go head to head, have our own special no-talking match, starting right now, you and me. Unless you're scared, and the winner gets to write a big L on the loser's forehead with permanent marker. On the playground after lunch on Thursday. How's that sound?" And he gave the paper to Jason. Lindsay grabbed the paper from Jason and read it, and there was no hesitation. She looked at Dave, nodded a big yes, held up her hand with her fingers making an L, and pointed at him. Then she wrote something and handed the paper to Helena, who read everything, wrote something, and passed the paper back to Lindsay, who wrote something more and then passed the paper to Jason, who passed it back to Dave. Lindsay had written, "Helena, you be the witness. Sign here." And Helena had written her name. And below Helena's signature, Lindsay had written, "No backing out now, fat mouth. Which color marker do you like best, red or black?" Dave pointed at her and pretended to laugh. She stuck out her tongue and then turned away and picked up her chat with Helena. Dave felt like he'd lost that skirmish. Lindsay always had a way of firing the last cannonball. Then he smiled as he thought how much fun it would be to paint a big L on her forehead. If he could win, that is. Otherwise. Dave wouldn't have put his feelings into these exact words, but he sat there in the quiet room sort of wishing it didn't have to be a war. Because it was very interesting. Not talking was interesting all by itself, even without the extra fun of the contest and the extra risk of this private battle with Lindsay. And he suddenly wondered what Lindsay thought about it, about the whole idea, and he wondered if she'd be honest enough to tell him. So Dave grabbed a fresh sheet of paper and wrote, "I'm kind of glad we're all doing this. The no talking thing. Like, I really didn't know was a word. It's pretty interesting. At least it is to me." Then he gave the paper to Jason. Jason tapped Lindsay's arm and handed her the new note. She read it and then gave Dave a short, suspicious look. And then she bent over the paper and wrote. Jason handed him the paper and Dave read her message. It said, "It is to me too. I'm thinking and thinking and thinking. Pretty amazing." Dave turned and caught Lindsay's eye, and they half nodded at each other. For one tiny fraction of a second, it wasn't boys against girls, and it wasn't a battle. It was just two smart kids enjoying an idea. Jason handed Dave another note, from him this time. "I'm not your personal delivery boy. Maybe you and Lindsay should sit at the same desk. Ha, ha, ha." Dave's face felt hot. He scribbled "You're crazy" onto Jason's note and jammed it back at him. And at the bottom of the page he and Lindsay had passed, he wrote, "Yeah, but no way you are going to win this fight. You and your stupid friends are going to go down big time." And as Dave tossed the note above Jason's head so it landed on Lindsay's desk, he made an ugly face at her and then shook his hands like he was trying to flip something gross off his fingers. He didn't wait for Lindsay's reaction. Dave turned away and began writing a new note to Scott. All during 7th period, Mr. Burton sat at his desk watching. He wrote some notes too, but they were notes to himself. No hesitation, everyone jumped right in. Some frustration with writing. It's slow. Some anger displayed. A lot of nodding and gesturing. Some hand signals. Tapping on desks and arms and shoulders to get attention. Some poking too. Mouth sounds, tongue clicking, lip popping, raspberries. Some animal sounds, quacking, whistling, barking, sometimes to get attention, sometimes to bother. Not much boy-girl or girl-boy note passing, but more than I'd expect from this group. A lot of smiling and frowning and other face-making. Not one single word out loud. Mr. Burton was taking a class at the State University 2 nights a week, studying for his master's degree. The course was called Human Development, and one of the topics they had studied was the way children learn to use language. Excuse me. Of course, this wasn't watching kids learn to use language. These students already were good with words, almost too good. No, this was watching children try to change how they express themselves, trying to use language in a new way. Mr. Burton was pretty excited. It was like having his own private language lab. He thought, if I keep careful notes, I bet I can write my big research paper on this. I can do interviews with the kids once they start talking again, and I can gather information from the other teachers too. There's so much good stuff to work with. This is great. When the last bell rang, Mr. Burton was sorry the class had to end, and he couldn't wait for the first class on Wednesday morning. For the fifth graders, that last bell on Tuesday meant something else. It meant they all had to go ride a bus and not talk. It meant they had to go to sports practice or dance or music lessons and not talk. It meant they had to go home and deal with moms and dads and brothers and sisters and neighbors and everyone else and not talk. No one was sure how all that was going to work, including Dave. But Dave was absolutely sure of one thing. He was going to do everything just right. Because if he messed up, it meant he'd be walking around school on Thursday afternoon with a big L on his forehead, and that was not going to happen. Do you think it's going to happen? Who's going to win their private contest between Dave and Lindsay?